Okay, here we go. This is going to be hopefully the last in the series, and we've got the last two chapters of Revelation to cover, and I'm going to just start out with a little bit of what we did last time, and then read through the chapters, and then go back and look closer at the Millennium, which Revelation really doesn't talk about at all. It mentions it and says what happens before and after, but it really doesn't give you much detail of what's going on there. Most of that's coming from the rest of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. So what I'm going to do is start reading, and back at the end of chapter 20, and then go on from there. We remember last time we left off with Jesus had come back, and they had set up the thrones for judges, and they were occupied by the souls of those who had been beheaded, who, for the reason that they did not take the mark of the beast or worship the image. And then it says in 25, it says the rest of the dead did not come back to life until 1,000 years were over. So these people who had been alive during the tribulation and at the midpoint when everyone was forced to take the mark, these people refused and were beheaded, and only these are the first resurrection. It says in the last half of chapter 20, verse 5. That's the first resurrection. It doesn't mean the first ever. Obviously, Jesus had been resurrected a long time ago, and even in the Old Testament, there was at least one resurrection that was a miracle, and Jesus raised a couple of people before he went to the cross. So obviously, first resurrection doesn't only mean everyone who came to faith in Jesus' resurrection during the church age. This isn't even talking about people who died during the first half of the tribulation. This is only people in the second half, when the bowl judgments happened and they were beheaded for refusing the mark. So that's when the end of the tribulation, and then there's 1,000 years, and during that time, these are the people who are raised in the first resurrection. Okay. And it says, verse 6, blessed and holy are those who have a part in the first resurrection. The second death has no jurisdiction over them, but they will be priests of God and of the anointed, and they will reign with him during the 1,000 years. And I forgot, I wanted to share the screen. I'll get that up. Okay, can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, sorry about that. I meant to share that right away when I started reading. I forgot about it. Okay. Then it says in verse 7, when the 1,000 years are completed, the adversary will be released. That is to say, Satan will be released from his prison. He had been kept in the abyss for 1,000 years. And then it says he will go out to mislead the nations in the four corners of the earth. And then it says Gog and Magog. Seems kind of strange to put that there, but there it is. I'll go back to that later. To gather them for battle. The number of them is like the grains of sand on the seashore. They went up all across the earth and surrounded the encampment of the holy people and the beloved city, which is Jerusalem. But fire came down from the sky and consumed them. Then the false accuser, the one misleading them, was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the wild animal or beast and the false prophet were. They will be tortured day and night forever. Then it shows what's called the white throne judgment, as opposed to the Bema seat of judgment, the seat of Christ, which the church was judged at long before, at the beginning of the tribulation. It says in verse 11, then I saw a large white throne, and there was someone sitting on it. The earth and sky fled away from his presence, but there was no place for them. So the earth and sky fled away. Then John says, then I saw the dead, the great and small, standing before the throne. Scrolls were opened, and then another scroll, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to their actions as recorded in the scrolls. The sea gave up the dead that were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and everyone was judged according to their actions or deeds or works. Those are all synonyms for that. Then death itself and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Then I saw, this is starting chapter 21 now. Then I saw a new sky and a new earth, because the first sky and earth had gone away and the sea is no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, descending from heaven, and God, having been prepared as a bride dressed for her groom. So there's a reference to a bride, and this time it's applied to the city called New Jerusalem that has been in heaven. Just quickly, I'm going to say that I think this is what Jesus was talking about at the Last Supper when he said, I am going to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many mansions. This is probably what he's talking about. Okay, I'll go on reading now and comment more later. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, the sanctuary of God is with people. He will reside with them. They will be his people, and he will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning or commotion or misery, because the old ways are gone. Then the one sitting on the throne said, look, I'm making everything new. And he added, write this down, because these words are trustworthy and true. He continued, it has come to pass. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the start and the finish. I will give freely to the thirsty from the well of the water of life. Those who conquer will inherit all this. I will be their God, and they will be my child. But the cowardly, the untrustworthy, or unfaithful, the disgusting, the murderers, the promiscuous, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all liars will have their share of the lake burning with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Then one of the seven messengers, or angels, with the bowls of the final seven disasters, came out and spoke to me. Here I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in spirit to a huge high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. It radiated the majesty of God, or the glory of God, and the way a very precious stone such as crystal and jasper reflects light. It had a huge high wall around it with 12 doorways, with a messenger or angel at each one, and over the doorways were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 doorways on each of the 4 sides, east, north, south, and west. The wall also had 12 foundations, named for the 12 ambassadors or apostles of the Lamb. Then the one speaking with me had a golden measuring stick with which to measure the city, its doorways, and its wall. The city is laid out in a square. The length and width are equal. It measured 1,380 miles in length, width, and also height. The wall itself measured 200 feet thick according to standard human measure, which the messenger is using. Let me check the footnote here. 1,200 stadia in Greek, and they have a pretty good idea of what those were, and that's where I'm getting these numbers. Okay, let's go back to where we were here. Chapter 21, verse 18. The wall is composed of jasper, and the city of pure gold, as clear as glass. The wall's foundations have been decorated with every kind of precious stone, and then it lists each one. I won't go through and read all of that. The 12 doorways were composed of 12 pearls, each one from a single pearl, and the city square was made of pure gold, as clear and transparent as glass. I'm going to stop here just for a second, just to go over a couple of things that are common statements. One being the streets of gold. That's where this comes from. If you ever heard that expression, the streets of the New Jerusalem, not heaven, the New Jerusalem. And it's so pure that you can see through it. It's transparent. And the other statement is the pearly gates. You've heard of that. And it's nothing like the cartoon version. What it is this New Jerusalem has 3 gates on each of its 4 sides, and each gate made from a single pearl. And there's an angel guarding each one of the gates. So St. Peter is not standing at some gates to decide who gets into heaven. That's just myth and legend and stories. What it actually says here is that angels guard these gates, and it's the gates of the city, not heaven, but the city of New Jerusalem, and that each one is made from a pearl. That's why they're called the pearly gates. So I just wanted to stop. And of course, the city is absolutely huge. And like I said, there's nothing that says it actually touches the earth. It comes down from heaven, but it doesn't seem to land anywhere. It never says where on earth it's put. And besides, it's a new earth by this time. At the end of the millennium, everything old is destroyed and it's recreated. And who's to say what the geography is like, or if we would know what it meant if it did tell us where it landed. So we don't even know if it landed. And so we know that this is not heaven, all of heaven. It's just the New Jerusalem. And John is trying to describe it. And he says, not only do we have 12 gates, but each gate is named after one of the tribes of Israel, and 12 foundations, each of which has the name of one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. Okay, so this has got both things in it. Even though all the 12 disciples were Jews, they were also the foundation of the church. And so they are the foundation of the New Jerusalem, which ought to give us a hint about who its residents will be, even though it's called Jerusalem. Okay, and he measured it. And I should also point out that just because it's got the same width and length and height doesn't mean it's a cube. It could be a cube. It could also be a pyramid, because a pyramid has 4 equal sides and could have an equal height, but that doesn't mean it's a square, going all the way up. But we are given the thickness of the walls, so I don't know. It could be either one. Picking up back on verse 22, I saw no temple in the city, because the Master God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city has no need of the sun or moon to shine on it, because the majesty of God is its light, and the Lamb is its lamp. So we have a light and the lamp that displays it. That's kind of interesting. The nations will walk about in its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their majesty into it. The city doors will never be locked on any day, because there will be no night. And the majesty and honor of the non-Judeans, that is to say the Gentiles, will be brought into it. But the vulgar, the disgusting, the false, whoever wasn't written in the Lamb's book of life will absolutely not be granted entry. Then this is chapter 22, verse 1. Then the messenger showed me the river of the water of life, shining like a crystal, flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb. In the middle of the city square and on either side of the river was the tree of life, which produces fruit in each of the 12 months of the year. Its leaves are for the healing of the non-Judeans. The curse will be no more. And I should point out, too, I used to wonder how one tree, it's singular, not plural, how one tree could be on either side of a river. But then I went on to find out that there are single trees that create a whole forest, that it's actually technically and scientifically one tree, yet the way it spreads its roots is that it will spread out underground and pop up at various places and look for all the world like different trees, but it's actually just one tree. So that helped clear that up for me. And it says the curse will be no more. Going on, the throne of God and the Lamb will be in the city, and his slaves will offer him divine service. They will gaze on his face and have his name on their foreheads. There will be no more night, and thus no more need for the light of a lamp or the sun, because the Master God will provide their light, and they will reign forever. Then the messenger said to me, these words are trustworthy and true, and the Master, the God of the spirits of the prophets, commissioned his messenger to show his slaves what must suddenly come to pass. Look, I am coming suddenly. Blessed are those who guard the words of the prophecy of this scroll. I, John, in verse 8, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I did, I fell down at the feet of the messenger showing me these things. But he says to me, look, no, I am just as co-slave with you and your brothers and sisters, the prophets, and those who guard the words of the scroll worship God. Just a quick note here. It's very unlike our habit of shooting the messenger. John here is tempted once again for the second time to worship the messenger. And he says, no, don't do it. I'm not God. Then he said to me, this is the angel or messenger, do not seal the words of the prophecy of the scroll, because the time is near. Let the unjust continue to harm, let the dirty remain dirty, let the just continue to be righteous, let the holy remain holy. Look, I am coming suddenly, bringing with me the wages everyone has earned. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the start and the finish. Happy are those who wash their robes. They are granted access to the tree of life and passage through the city doorways. But outside are the loathsome, the sorcerers, the promiscuous, the murderers, idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. I, Jesus, sent my messenger to give you this testimony to the congregations or churches. I am the root and family of David, the shining morning star. The Spirit and the bride say, come, and let those who hear say, come. Let the thirsty come, let whoever chooses drink freely of the water of life. Indeed, I testify to all who hear the words of the prophecy of this scroll. Whoever adds to these words, God will add to that person the disasters they describe. And whoever subtracts from these words, God will subtract their share from the tree of life and the holy city as those words describe. The one testifying to these things says, yes, I'm coming suddenly. Absolutely, come, Master Jesus. May the favor of Master Jesus be with you all. And that is the end of Revelation. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Let me go back a little bit here to, whoops, I went a little too far there. So at the end of the millennium, the Satan was thrown into the lake of fire, where the two beasts had been thrown earlier alive at the end of the tribulation, and they will be in conscious eternal torment. There's no, the word, people will squabble over what that word means. It's where we get our word eon, and it means an age, but it also means an unknown time. And so there is no indication here that there's any end to this. And that here, once again, you have a word that gets its meaning from context or its limits from context, and the context doesn't give any hint of an end here. The white throne is for the survivors of the tribulation, because that's what we're, starting in chapter 20 is where we're at the end of the tribulation, beginning of the millennium. And then the dead are judged according to their deeds. And this is where, once again, the people are going to give an account for the way they live. It isn't just because in this age of grace, people get the idea that you can be as bad as you want to be, or a license to sin, because all you need is faith in Jesus to be saved. And it's true that that's all you need to be saved. But a person who lives to sin probably isn't saved, because a saved person has the Holy Spirit in them, for one thing, and for another thing, if they understood what it is they accepted Jesus and his sacrifice, and should live in gratitude and not try to go around irritating him. And so a person who lives that way, violating every principle that Jesus taught, probably didn't understand salvation, and they thought if they said a prayer they would be saved, and regardless of what the prayer meant or whether they understood that they were accepting reconciliation with God. So but either way, the point is, and in the age of grace, that it is just faith that saves you, but you have to have faith in Jesus, and you're accepting being reconciled to God. So, and given that, then you will undoubtedly refrain from trying to irritate God. And so even though everybody's at a different stage of growth, you would expect people to keep improving in that regard and not to wallow in sin. And so what are your deeds going to be? What's the basis for judgment then for the believer? At least for the Christians, the church age believers, it says that in 1 Corinthians that I think I described this before, where it's as if our deeds are like a house, and we're put inside the house, and the house is set on fire to see how well it holds up. And it says that people who's had no good deeds, or everything they thought they did for the wrong reason or whatnot, they will look as though they escaped through a wall of flames. So they themselves would be saved, but they would have nothing to show for it, and they'll have basically smoke on their clothes. Hold on. All right. And then that's the Christian church being judged then at the Bema seat, or this judgment seat of Christ. This is a different judgment. This is after the tribulation and after the millennium. Millennium meaning 1,000 years. And these people are being judged. These are the survivors, or, well, let's see, it's just the dead. So these are not the survivors, obviously. The living survivors were judged when Jesus came back. Remember, I talked about the sheep and goat judgment. They were judged on the way they treated the Jews. And so that's not this judgment either. So this is actually the third judgment. And this is the final one, because it's after the 1,000 years and everything. And so these are the dead, the great and small, everybody, all the dead are standing before what is called the judgment seat of Christ. So that's when we use those terms, Bema seat and judgment seat of Christ, we're talking about the two very different judgments. But this is the final one, and for all who have died. And it says that the book of life is open, and the dead were judged according, look down here in verse 12, 2012, interesting number. The dead were judged according to their actions as recorded in the scrolls. In other words, everything people did was written down, everything they did in their life. And they were judged according to that. Judged not according to, it doesn't say anything about faith here. These are the dead that are apparently the unrighteous dead. At any rate, after this judgment, death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire, and along with anyone whose name was not found written into the book of life. So this is as an absolute finality to it. And so what that means is that there can be no more mortals after this point. No one can die after this point, because there's no place for them to go, for one thing, and there's no judgment for them. Nothing is ever mentioned about another judgment after this one. So this is the outside limit for anyone to have been mortal. Okay, so that means during the millennium, there were mortals repopulating the earth. Well, now anyone who died during that time, they would be standing at this judgment as well. So in that respect, it isn't just the unrighteous dead, but most of it is going to be, because we don't know how many people are going to be alive during the millennium, but compared to all the dead of all the other ages, it's going to be a small number. So yeah, this white throne judgment is it's not the church, and it's not to see which mortals could go through the millennium. It's the dead of all the rest of the dead. They're being judged at this judgment here. So no, it isn't just the unrighteous, but most of them probably will be, just by sheer numbers here. Then after this judgment, then the holy city, the New Jerusalem, descends from heaven, and God, having been prepared as a bride dressed for her groom. So this is another, and the messenger calls it the bride as well. And like I said, it had as its foundation the 12 disciples of Jesus, the foundation of the church. So I think there's a very clear connection there. And let me scroll to see if I would get anything else I wanted to say about this passage, and then I'm going to go to some other passages that say more about that 1,000 years. So I'm kind of going around it right now, and then I might take a short break, and then I'll go back to talk about more about the millennium, and then Gog and Magog wars, because there's two of them, even though a lot of people believe there's only one. Okay, but notice that we're talking, all these words about who is excluded have to do with the city of the New Jerusalem. Okay, so what that means is, the judgments are all done, and it's hard to say, what does it mean when it just said that everybody whose name was not in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire? Does it mean there's some unrighteous people whose names were in the book of life? That doesn't make any sense at all. But yet here it says that there are these kinds of bad people outside of the city, and that's in the lake of fire and the second death. But later on, it will say again that there will be people outside the city. So it can get a little confusing at times. Nobody has all the answers. At any rate, then the city is described, and I already told you about its size, and the wall was 200 feet thick, and everything was like jewels and pearls and things like that, and transparent gold, and that Jesus, the Lamb himself, is the source of radiation of the light of God instead of the sun and moon and stars. And it says the majesty and honor of the non-Judeans will be brought into it. Not sure what that means either, because nobody's mortal by this time. Everybody's been judged. And yet, here again, this is what I was just talking about, but the vulgar and all this will absolutely not be granted entry. Well, it seems kind of obvious and redundant to say that after it just said that they'd be thrown in the lake of fire. So that's just, little things that aren't quite, at least I haven't seen explained to my satisfaction yet. Water of life, and the tree of life, no more curse. What is the curse? The curse is death. The curse is something that began in the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve turned on God, and the ground was cursed. The very earth itself was cursed. In the New Testament, it talks about nature groaning and writhing, waiting for everything to be made right again. And this is that point. This is where the curse of death and decay and suffering is done away with. Okay, this is the end of the millennium. Then some final parting words, and it says, here's where a lot of people, let me scroll down a little bit, do not seal the words of the prophecy because time is near. Daniel was told to seal his prophecy, but Revelation, John is told not to seal it. And then he says down in verse 18, whoever adds to the words, God will add to the disasters, and whoever subtracts, God will subtract their share from the tree of life. And so that a lot of people take that to refer to the whole Bible, but it doesn't. It says this scroll of this prophecy. So they're talking about not trying to add or subtract from this prophecy, that this revelation that Jesus is giving. Of course, it should go without saying that nobody should add or subtract from any part of the Bible, or that the words of God, they should not be monkeying with those. But this particular verse is about this particular scroll of prophecy, so not the whole Bible. And at the end here, John is saying he wants Jesus to come, and some people have an issue with that. They think it's wrong to want Jesus to come because look, what about all the people who need to be saved? Well, then they can ask the Apostle John, the beloved disciple, and Jesus himself for why these words are in the Bible, saying that they should pray for him to come soon. So there you go. I need just a couple of minutes break. You're there, Larry, you can unmute and maybe talk to some people in chat for just a couple of minutes if you could. I will be right back.
Okay. Yep. I'm here. Take your time.
All right. Thanks.
Take your time. Good to see everybody out there. Actually, we have negative viewers, so I'm sure anybody out there say hello. Only kidding. I see Victoria's out there. That's good. Good to see Vic. How you doing? Elaine's out there. Good to see you also. Obviously, a few of us watching the watch page as well, as Paul is giving, obviously the dissertation of what she's going through and breaking it down very meticulous, which is why I'm glad that she's actually taken the time to do this series of how she got to the point where when somebody asks her the question, they come at her and they're like, oh, well, you don't understand. Well, yeah, she really does understand. She's obviously done the homework on this, and it's a very it's a breath of fresh air to see that somebody has actually taken the time to go through it so meticulously. For anybody to come at certainly at Paul or others that have done the research and actually go and try to attack them is very disheartening. And the reason I say that is once you learn, and we've done this in private chats, pardon me, where Paul has actually shown some of what she's doing here and some different things of the interpretation and the translation from the Greek language into the English language, which I have a different version of that. And she's gone through and meticulously done it almost word for word and gone through it for somebody to actually come at her and say, oh, you don't understand. She really does understand. She would like an open forum conversation and maybe talk about it, not to get on a high horse and think that you know it all, because certainly none of us do. And I believe Paul is back now, and she's going to go ahead and continue.
Yep. Thanks, Larry. Was there any? I took a quick look at the chat just now when I sat down. I think I covered some of that stuff while I was going along, because I realized when I was talking I wasn't real clear about the difference between the Bema Seat judgment and the White Throne judgment. Vic, I see, asked if there is a judgment for the fallen angels. Mm-hmm. There is a passage in the New Testament in the letters talking to the church that says that we will judge angels. I think that's also in 1 Corinthians. So I don't know if that includes all of them or just the good ones or just the bad ones. I don't know. It doesn't say. It just says that we will judge angels. So, and since these the people during the millennium who are judging the nations are those that were beheaded for not taking the mark, our judgment seems to be at least concerning eternity. It's not judging people on the earth, not judging our fellow humans, but actually the angelic beings. So we aren't given any detail about that. Let's see. Alrighty. I think I'll go ahead and go on unless there was a question I missed while I was away for a second. I don't think so. All right. I will. What's that?
Yeah, you're good. Keep going. Keep going. It's actually, it's interesting because, and I've said this before, I don't want to distract from, I don't like to interrupt and distract because you're on a roll. I don't want to disrupt that roll and you keep going. It's interesting how you can plug some of the things in that you're discussing with what's happening today about taking the mark of the beast and the chips and everything that's coming about and different things is very interesting. For myself, listening to it, you can apply it to what's going on around us today.
Right, exactly. I just mentioning privately before the hangout about supposedly there are reports of Russian ships in the English Channel, which is very interesting. But yeah, there's all sorts of things happening. There's been programs, radio, internet, whatever, for years about prophecy in the news and all kinds of things that people have been watching for a long time. And it's just really fascinating to watch. When you know some of these things ahead of time, you start to look for them and you go, well, that's a possible fulfillment. We got to be careful we don't do what's called, I think I mentioned the term newspaper eschatology, where you jump on everything that happens in current events and go, this is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Of course it's not. It's just you have to be careful, and the way to be careful is to actually stop and read the details and pay attention to those differences, because we're going to get into those differences again on the Gog and Magog war thing. So,
Gotcha. Okay, don't keep going. I don't want to distract. I'm going to go ahead and mute. Go ahead.
Alrighty, thanks, Larry. I am going to just read a little bit from my commentary here, and then I'm going to move on to a couple other things. Here is where on the commentary, and all these links are in the description. Millennium is the Latin word. Milli is a prefix that means 1,000. Just as, like millipedes and things like that, they don't literally have 1,000 legs, but they have a lot more than a mere centipede, which only has 100, something like that. At any rate, milli means 1,000. And it's a combination with the word annum, and that means year, or the base word anno. Anno Domini is where we get the abbreviation AD for year of our Lord, Domini meaning Lord or Master. And so that's the millennium, just means 1,000 years, and that's all it's called in the Bible is 1,000 years. Now, I have good reason to believe that this 1,000 years is the kingdom described so often in the Old Testament prophecies, and we're going to get into that a little bit. At any rate, during that time, Satan is imprisoned in the abyss, and Jesus himself is ruling the earth, as it says in Psalms 2, I believe it is, and a couple other places. He rule with a rod of iron. In other words, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. It's Mr. Zero Tolerance. It's for 1,000 years against evil. So it will be a paradise very much like the Garden of Eden, except people will still die. But it says in one of the Old Testament passages that anyone who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth. So we're looking at the very extended lifespans that were probably before the flood, where people lived. I think the longest recorded age in the Old Testament genealogies is Methuselah, who lived, now I can't think of it, 900 some years. So yeah, it's going to be very extended lifespans, and all the people who enter the millennium are adults, and they will, there could be some children, I suppose, but at any rate, a lot of adults, and they will repopulate the world, and those adults will remember the tribulation and be able to tell their children about it, and they will. But eventually, after several hundred years, that there's going to be children who have no memory, even a recent memory of these things, and this is how people who don't remember the past or don't have direct experience can be led astray, and that's what will happen at the end of the 1,000 years. So now let's see. Let me read down here in the commentary. The first resurrection is that one I mentioned already, and then we are told of the bride, the guests, and the armies of heaven. There's different entities. We're not all the church. We're not all Israel either. So because, it's like I mentioned before about the parable of the 10 virgins or bridesmaids, and 5 were foolish. That's also another name, the foolish virgins. That these could not refer to the church because the church is the bride. And the bridesmaids, who are they? And who's the bride, who's the groom, who are the bridesmaids, who are the friends of the bride, who are the servants? There's all sorts of groups of people, and I believe these correlate to when a person lived in history, as far as just the righteous people. That is to say, like in the time between Adam and Noah. We don't have a lot of details on who was righteous and who wasn't, but certainly they had a more direct contact with God and would be fairly obvious. But as time went on, in different epochs or dispensations, as a lot of us call it, and some people just absolutely hate that idea, but I believe it's true, that a dispensation is like an age or epoch, and it means literally house rules. It's where we get our word economy, and it's a way that God deals with people in a certain age or period of history. And in all those periods, different things applied. And I believe that because of which age or dispensation a person lived in, that will determine which of these groups they're in. And this present age, the church age, anyone who belongs to Jesus is actually an heir or a child of God. And so this is a pretty privileged position. And we are also, in another respect, don't mix the two analogies, the bride of Christ, which we're also called the body of Christ, all sorts of things. So don't mix your analogies there. At any rate, there are different groups of people, even in eternity. And it doesn't mean one group suffers or is more privileged than another. It just means, even the people that I mentioned who look as though they escaped through the wall of flames will be happy to be there. Considering the alternative, they'll be happy just to be in the door. So, after the 1,000 years without war or suffering, one might expect people to accept the fact that the kingdom of God is a good thing, but Satan is released and immediately misleads people from all over the world into one final desperate act of rebellion. So we will have come full circle on history by then. Foolishly, they surround Jerusalem, but before they can say lock and load, God brings down fire from heaven. Of course, those are my words, not in the Bible. God brings down fire from heaven, and they are all consumed. At long last, Satan is thrown into the lake of fire to join the beast and false prophet, all to be tortured forever. If the events of the 70th week prove nothing else, it's that eternity will not be long enough to get the enemies of God to change their minds. So here they've had direct access to God. They can see Jesus with their own eyes, and they've had 1,000 years of peace and happiness and prosperity and long life. And what do? The minute Satan's let out of prison, they go follow Satan. Go figure. That's just what some people choose. Then I talked about the white throne judgment, and then that God remakes everything new. I mentioned before in an earlier hangout that sky and heaven are the same Greek word, uranos, and from when we get a planet name. And then it will be all replaced, but we won't care. All we will know is that nothing bad will happen in it anymore. So we get a new sky and earth. I don't think it means the heaven where God resides is replaced. There's no need for that. So since heaven and sky are the same, you can take them either way, and the context doesn't always tell you, then it seems to me by just reasoning it out that this is talking about the sky, above the earth. So those are replaced, and the first item we're told about is that the New Jerusalem is coming down. I was just guessing here a little bit about where it would be, but look at the phrase, remember Alpha and Omega, the start and the finish. both of those phrases were used. Those phrases were used for both God the Father and God the Son. So both of them are called the first and last, the Alpha and the Omega, the start and the finish. Jesus uses those terms for himself, and those terms are also used for God the Father. So when people say Jesus didn't claim to be God, I beg to differ. Not just on that, but that's one of the reasons I beg to differ. And take a note that in the list of things that God doesn't like in the passages I read a little bit ago, that cowardice is as revolting to God as murder and promiscuity. There was also a lot about liars, and it doesn't mean, every single little white lie. It means people who lie to deceive on a regular basis and to harm people. Because technically, there's an incident in the Old Testament where one of the prophets was going to a certain place to anoint the next king of Israel, which happened to be King David. And he was going to take go down there, and even though Saul was still king, and when God told him to do that, he was worried. He's like, I'm going to get in trouble for, that's like treason, isn't it? And God says, I'll tell you what, you get some animals, you go down there, and if anybody stops you and asks what you're doing, you say, well, I'm going to a sacrifice at such and such a house. What, do you want to come along? And that's what he did. Well, that's actually a cover story. So nobody was telling the real reason for the trip. And this is God himself telling his prophet to do that. So there you go about, little gray areas of lying. But the point being, when it's talking about liars here, about judgment and how horrible liars are, it's talking about people such as our political leaders, the media, people who hide the truth and twist it and use it to enslave people and rob people and whatnot. Okay. Then John is taken to, when he sees the New Jerusalem, he is first taken to a very high mountain. Obviously, all the mountains in the old earth have been destroyed, so this is part of the new earth. Apparently, there are some mountains. I don't know. So it seems to me, as I said, that the church is involved in this building, and I believe that, once again, that Jesus was talking about this New Jerusalem, and that we, the church, will have rooms in it, residences, you could call it. That this is the Father's house that he was preparing a place for us in. Let me skip down a little bit here. And I already talked about the size of the city. And I said that when the phrase about the curse will be no more cannot be true during the millennium, because some people will still die. And there's that Old Testament passage, it's Isaiah 65:20, where it says that those who die at 100 will be thought a mere youth and be thought to be cursed because they died so young at 100 years old. So then in closing, it happens suddenly, not soon. Remember the difference, I talked about that before. And when Jesus does come, it will be quick and unexpected. So at any rate, people should never be thinking that he's not coming today. He could come at any day. And if you live like that, it will affect the way you live, because you don't want to be caught doing something you shouldn't, or think that you've got another day to make things, right again. You just never know. Let's see, I mentioned about shooting the messenger instead of worshiping the messenger. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Now, at the end of the commentary, I have what I called a simplified chronology. This is just a guess. Could be wrong. Probably is. But it isn't too bad. At least it can be justified from the text. And this is just my opinion of the sequence. So if you're, not following Jesus yet, and you find yourself here later when all the rest of us are snatched up, and you see this sort of thing start to happen, then at least you've got a roadmap for what comfort that might be. I won't go over that right now. And then there's an alternate scenario, because I realized in studying that there's 3 origins for the beasts. 2 of them seem very much the same. There's a couple of little differences you can see here. But the other one, obviously, is the false prophet, the sheep and the wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak. But these are all the attributes and the places you can find these attributes. And then, of course, the other main entity is dragon, Satan, devil, ancient serpent. And then I asked some questions trying to figure out, are they the same? Are they not the same? Then I talk in here about different theories about the 144,000. I just happened to notice that they're saying that the text is blurry. I don't know what I can do about that. I've seen that before in a lot of Hangouts where the text is just blurry. It looks sharp enough to me, but I don't know. I can't. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. But I did. The rest. I'll just have to go through it. But the links are in the description, and you can follow along if you want to click on one of those links. You can see these are all on my website, so you could look at the text there. Sorry about that. Okay, it's better now. I don't know what I did. Anyway, maybe it's when I'm scrolling. I'm not sure. But so I just go into a bunch of alternate theories, and I don't want to do that right now because that's something you need to sit and read, and I don't want to fly past it. So all I concluded in all those questions that I skipped over is that the most important marker is the midpoint of the tribulation when the beast declares himself God in the temple and defiles it. That's when you know you've hit the midpoint of the tribulation, and there's 3.5 years to go, but these days may be shortened. But you probably won't care at that point if you're still there, because it'll just be totally awful. So that's all I can tell you is you'll know when the midpoint is. Okay, now I want to go over what my prophecy book I had to say about the millennium and all. There's a bunch of Old Testament passages, such as in Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Amos, that talk about details about the millennium. One is Ezekiel 36, and another is where it goes into chapter 40 through 48. That's to the end, I think, of Ezekiel. You remember I talked about Ezekiel before with the invasion of Gog and Magog. Well, this is after that. Doesn't mean immediately after in time, but it does mean that this is part of that same prophecy, the same prophet, I should say, the same prophecy book, Ezekiel, and it goes on for a long time about how things are going to be during the millennium. Another passage of Jeremiah, and it talks about, I think it's mostly Ezekiel, though, that talks about a different kind of a priesthood, different sacrificial system. It's not the same as before. And right now I'm going to skip over to chapter 11 here, what I call a tale of three cities, because this is going to, it's another thing that I'm just going to touch on. There's the New Jerusalem after the millennium, okay? But during the millennium, there will still be earthly Jerusalem and a place called the Lord is there. So there's two main cities during the millennium in the 1,000 years after the tribulation. And the way we know there are three different cities is by looking at the details, and there's those differences again. And so I went into some calculations, how it gives cubits in here, and I go into calculations to compare the sizes of these cities. And the similarities between New Jerusalem and the Lord is there is they all have the same number of gates with the names of the tribes of Israel over them, and they all have trees along the river bearing fruit for food and leaves for healing. But there's all these differences. They have different names. Obviously, the New Jerusalem is 800 times larger than the Lord is there. The wall of the New Jerusalem is very thick, and we don't know anything about the thickness of the other wall, but still there's no mention of it, and then you would think something like that would be mentioned. Each of the two cities has a river, but they flow from different places. One flows from the center of the New Jerusalem, but the district temple I'm mentioning here is from the city of the Lord is there. That's where the river comes from rather than the center of the city. So there's a difference. They go to different destinations. One has one tree on either side. The other has an uncountable number of trees. There are no seas on the new earth. The district is bordered by the Mediterranean and Dead Seas. So there's all sorts of differences. The Jerusalem during the tribulation will be ransacked during the second half of the tribulation, as I mentioned, and overrun. But then Jesus, when he comes down, thinking of some other Old Testament passages as well, we come down with the armies of heaven, and they will march and take back the city. Okay, but it's those differences you have to really pay attention to. And during that time, as I said, there will be a new temple, a new priesthood, and this will go on for 1,000 years. And so what I want to show you here, this will help a little bit. A map section. This was remember back a couple of hangouts ago, I mentioned Psalm 83 and the nations that want to wipe Israel off the map. And then Ezekiel 38, where it's a wider area from northern Africa all the way up to Eastern Europe. And this is up above there, toward Russia, is where Gog and Magog are located. And I'll come back to that. I'm going to focus on Gog and Magog here in a bit. This is the general layout of the land during the millennium for Israel. It seems kind of odd, but the important point is that we are given boundaries by landmarks, and those landmarks must apply to the current earth to have any kind of meaning for us. We are given no geographical markers for the new heaven and the new earth. So the fact that we're given these things, and it's naming cities, it's naming rivers and lakes and seas, and so this is how we get the contour of this map. And this is just my rough drawing. This is probably terrible, but it gives you the gist of it. Each of the tribes has access to the Mediterranean Sea. And then down here in the middle, between Judah and Benjamin, is what's called the sacred district. And in the center of that, this whole land here is given to someone called the prince. This is believed to be a descendant of King David, so fulfills the prophecies. And in the middle is the sacred district. And then I did a close-up of that, where it has the Levite priests, the Zadok priests, who are in the temple area. And the temple is just, relative size here should be fairly accurate. And that's where that river comes from. And then there's farmland, and where the Lord is there, that's the city down there, and then each of the gates on the four sides. And that's from Ezekiel 45 through 48. And then I have some links here that give you more about, this information. So that's just something about the millennium and the kind of focus that the Bible has on that. Now I'm going to talk about Gog and Magog, and just going to briefly focus on this part about how the armies are destroyed, because that's a difference. Remember, I'm always emphasizing the differences. And so in this one, this is different than the one in Revelation toward the end. So what we got here is, it says down in verse 21, Ezekiel 38:21, I will call for a sword to attack Gog on all my mountains, declares the Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will judge him with plague and bloodshed. I will rain down on him, his troops, and the many peoples who are with him, a torrential downpour, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. That's how the army's defeated. So remember that when we go back and look at Revelation again. And let me just do a quick search to get there a little sooner. Let's see how they are destroyed. It says, they went up all across the earth and surrounded the encampment of the holy people and the beloved city, but fire came down from the sky and consumed them. And that's all it says. Fire came down and consumed them. Okay? And here it says, plague, bloodshed, torrential downpour, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. So there's fire as part of that, but it says a lot more. So there's a difference. And another difference is where the nations come from. In this section, Gog brings many nations in that area, but not the whole world. It's just, if you look at earlier in the chapter, it says, let me look up here, Persia, verse 5, Persia, Ethiopia, Put, Gomer, Beth Togarmah from the remote parts of the north. Those are, Persia, of course, is Iran. Ethiopia is Northern Africa, it has the same name today. Put, I believe, now I lost, I can't remember. Anyway, it's another Northern African nation. So we have specific nations and coming against Israel, and they're dispensed with in a certain way. Whereas in Revelation, at the end, it says that these armies come from all over the world, and they are consumed by fire and nothing more. So we have similarities and differences here again. And so that to me says two fulfillments. So there's a Gog-Magog invasion near the beginning of the tribulation, and there's another one at the end of the millennium. So they're separated by over 1,000 years. Now, I found an interesting site today, and it's called trackingbibleprophecy.com. And they have a section, they have a lot of stuff here, and my standard disclaimer, I don't necessarily agree with everything on any site that I recommend. But here they have a section on the Gog and Magog war. And it pretty much says a lot of the same things that I mentioned, and they have a handy little map here. There's the area of Russia, and down into getting into Eastern Europe here with the other Bible names that they give these area. There's Persia, Iran, and if I haven't mentioned it, there was a part of one of the other Old Testament passages that mentions Sheba and Dedan. That is talking about the Arabs, the area of Saudi Arabia. And they, when Gog invades, they just stand there and protest. They don't do anything, but they say, "Are you going to go and plunder them?" They just stand there and ask the question. They're not involved, but they put up only a mild protest. So let me scroll down a little bit more here, and they say too that that Gog is the leader of the horde and the prince of these areas. They give a reference for the area being Russia. Some argue strongly and say, no, it's only Turkey, but there's other counter arguments that kind of make me think that, yes, it is Russia. And it talks about, some theorizing about what it could mean in current events. But the important thing is that Gog is not the name of a person. By their studies and many others I've seen, they believe that Gog is the supernatural power behind the leader of the area. So it's just like how the person who will wind up being the beast is not actually possessed by Satan until the midpoint. It could be the same thing here with if we're talking about the beast or the false prophet or Gog. These are people who are supernaturally, demonically possessed at some point. So the fact that Gog and Magog are mentioned over 1,000 years apart is not a problem. It's not the individual who is important, it's the office or position. So it's also interesting that Gog is called a chief prince and not a king. And then they theorize about what that could possibly mean. Interesting phrase, Prince of Persia. There used to be a video game called by that name, and it refers to someone who fought against the heavenly chief prince, the Archangel Michael, and in Daniel 10. which is, of course, right after Daniel 9 with the 70 weeks prophecy. And it says that, after they give him the angel gives Daniel the prophecy, he says that he was detained by the prince of Persia for a while before he could come and talk to Daniel. So there was some supernatural struggling going on and all that. And an interesting phrase about the Gog-Magog war, at least to the first one, it doesn't seem to apply so much at the end of Millennium, but it just seems like more of a current thing, where it says, God says, I will turn you around and put hooks into your jaws and lead you out with all your army, horses, horsemen, and as if to say that Russia would be unwillingly or reluctantly dragged into a Middle East conflict, which seems to happen a lot. Everybody gets involved in these, kind of fighting over which faction in the Middle East they want to align with, and the alliances change all the time. But right now, Russia's been very heavily involved in the Middle East. They had stayed out of it for a long time, and now it seems this article speculates that perhaps after the Psalm 83 war, where Israel's borders are greatly expanded and they feel at peace because they've gotten rid of all their immediate hostile neighbors, that these the survivors, the other Muslims especially, would demand that Russia come to their aid per some agreement that they might have with them, and they get dragged into this war, and then of course they're destroyed for coming against Israel. But that's just an interesting phrase to remember from Ezekiel 38. And they give a lot of other details about, interesting tie-ins to various things. And they also mention about horses and the fact that horses, even in some modern wars, are used in very rugged terrain, mountainous areas, and that's exactly what's around Israel. And where they die, the Gog army will die on the mountains of Israel. So, being a mountainous region, it shouldn't be a big surprise that they're on horseback. Ethiopia and Libya, I think, were some of the names I was trying to think of. With I'm glad they said that. They align with Cush and Put in the Bible terminology. Those are Ethiopia and Libya. So we're talking Northern Africa. And then they speculate different ideas on how far the area extends that the armies would come from. Let me scroll down a little bit. Just a lot of interesting stuff here about that, but it does explain, and when you look at the details, it explains why it's so unlikely that this is all the passages, both in Ezekiel and Revelation, are talking about the same battle. It doesn't seem likely at all when you consider everything and not just look at the similarities. If you look down a little farther, there was something else. There's a passage where they believe that one person believes that they can trace historically who the lions, like there's a group called the Young Lions of Tarshish, who they were, and gives some ideas of who he thinks they were. They could be up as far away as Britain, could, by extension apply to the United States. That's just a theory, but it is interesting. There mentioned Sheba and Dedan in Genesis 10. Those were grandsons of Cush, and they settled in the area which is today Saudi Arabia. So lots of material here that you can go through. And it mentions Gog and different various passages where they say, well, this one looks like the same entity in prophecy, and this one does not, and why. But there's just so much to go through, and you're just going to have to read. That's all I can tell you. Sometimes you just have to read. There's so much to go over. The point being, why I wanted to talk about Gog and Magog is because that seems to be the next major event to come, the one that is pretty unmistakable. And the reason it's unmistakable is because of what happens to them when they go to the mountains of Israel, and whatever else may, if I'm wrong about the two battles and it's all happens at once, you will know that this is the Gog-Magog incident when fire comes down from heaven and consumes them, so that they, before they even get to Israel. So, beyond the mountains. These are, I'm trying to give markers and things, like the abomination of desolation is the middle of the tribulation. And there's two witnesses in the first half, two witnesses in Jerusalem. So these are the main points to remember. You can't, nobody's expected to know every detail when it happens, because you're going to be very preoccupied with other things if you're unfortunate enough, you've chosen not to go in the rapture. So you're going to be here for all this stuff. And at least if you're seeing that the Bible was right about it, and you're seeing these things as they happen, and then they make sense, then maybe you'll be one of those people who turns to God during the tribulation. There will be a lot of them. Then the next page of this Gog article talks about why this person is not the Antichrist or beast. Differences and similarities again. And whether it's the Battle of Armageddon, it's not. There's some more discussion of the passages, but it's a very good set of articles. And they go into various theories about when they think this is going to happen. And here's a nice chart comparing the seal judgments with the Gog and Magog war, which I think is very interesting, because I've said before, I believe that it's possible that the seals happen between the rapture and the actual start of the tribulation, that the tribulation only starts when the 7-year treaty is enforced. It doesn't happen at the rapture. It happens when that treaty starts. Whether there's a bunch of time between those two events, we don't know. But it's possible that space between those two events could be when the seal judgments happen. And if so, that would be when the Gog and Magog war happens, the first one. Okay, and here you can see the similarities, that there's a false peace, and that corresponds with the rider on the white horse, the first horse of the apocalypse, so to speak. And there's the corresponding reference in Ezekiel for Gog and Magog, and then death by the sword, death by pestilence or plague, death by the beasts of the earth, a great earthquake, cosmic disturbances, sun black and moon like blood, and that the wrath of God has come. So they go through the seals, and it's equivalent points in the, Ezekiel 38 and a couple of other Old Testament references. And I think it's a pretty good lineup, if you ask me. So it's quite possible that that's when that happens, and that's why I believe it happens, that Gog and Magog war is an early event during the tribulation rather than a late one. I think, yes, they did have another chart here where they talk about the Old Testament book prophecy of Joel about a Middle East war. And it starts out with sounding an alarm for the day of the Lord is coming, and that everyone is going to shake at God's presence. Darkness and gloominess, fire devouring the enemies of God, appearance like horses, noise like chariots. They run like mighty men, climb the wall. That's the description I mentioned before about the armies following Jesus when he comes back, when he first comes to the earth after the tribulation. More descriptions of that same army, earthquakes, just so many parallels. This goes on for quite a while. So I think this, as I've said before, I think there's a good reason to believe that Revelation is the final description of a lot of things that were said before in the Old Testament. And of course, after the third chapter, after these things, after the letters to the churches, you don't hear about the church again until the New Jerusalem in Revelation. So between like chapter 4 and chapter 21, the church is never mentioned by that name at all. There is no, or ecclesia in Greek, is simply not there. And so in the Old Testament, there's passages in the New Testament that say these things were hidden, and that especially about Jesus being crucified, because he said if they had known about these things and understood them, they wouldn't have crucified him and he wouldn't have died for our sins and so on and so forth. But the prophecies were sealed before. There's another New Testament reference that says that even the angels long to look into these things, and that the prophets themselves didn't always know what they were writing. They didn't understand it, and they wanted to understand it, but it wasn't for their time. And so now we can look back on it and go, hey, we now that we have the New Testament and a bunch of history behind us, we can look back on these things and go, wow, these really do line up, and this is what these things were talking about. And the difficult thing is to weave in all the Old Testament details with Revelation and anything else in the New Testament. It can be done, but there's so much of it and so many things that depend on other things that no one can really know for sure, but I'm seeing enough of it that we do understand that convinces me that this is the fulfillment of the rest of these prophecies to come in Revelation. So I would highly recommend going to these sites that are listed in the description there. And we've only gone an hour, but that's okay because this is the last one in the series of prophecy. Obviously, you could go on for the rest of your life trying to study these things. But as I said, I wanted to hit the gist of it, the main points, so that when these things happen, people will know that the Bible was right, and hopefully to convince them they don't want to go through this stuff, and then there's only one way to avoid it. A lot of people, Christians, believe that I'm totally of the devil for saying that, we won't go through it, but it's worth a shot. You got to consider the fact that if there's any possibility that that's true, and I think there's a strong possibility, talking about the rapture or departure, then for whatever reason or another, nobody knows how long they're going to live anyway, that you should probably consider following Jesus anyway, because there's absolutely nothing to lose in the long run. You may lose something now. There's people today dying just because they follow Jesus. But so there you are. And I'm going to first look in the panel chat here to see if I'm missing anything. I haven't paid much attention. Yeah, and Jay for the New Jerusalem, he's saying New Jersey, of course. Haha, Larry. So you say Vic asks about Leviathan. That's from the book of Job is our best description. I think there's another reference. I can't recall it right now, but Leviathan and Behemoth are the two creatures mentioned there. I think it's Job 38, if I remember right. Seems to me to describe a fire-breathing dragon. I think that when a lot of cultures have legends of something, such as the flood or the dragons, then there probably used to be something like that. And I think that's what Job is describing there, a creature that is heavily scaled with armor, and it has fire coming out of its nose or mouth, and it's terrifying, and you can't tame these things. And so I'm not sure what else you wanted to know about Leviathan, but it's toward the end of the book of Job, if you want to read the details there.
Yeah, she posted a little while ago, and then I tried to get it out there after she asked.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it really wasn't part of the prophecy discussion anyway, but that's okay. Anything else other than I think the political alignments, technology, the harm being done to the earth and the human genome, all have an air of finality about them as far as how many times the cycle of history can repeat. I think we're about out of repetitions, and probably closer to these things than a lot of people want us to be. But
I would throw in my 2 cents and say that anybody who can actually apply anything being said in the chats and hangouts like this, apply it to what's happening right now. And I remember the Georgian, the 5-day war when it happened. My ex happens to be Georgian. She was actually in Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, when Russia invaded, with my youngest one. Very troubling time at the time that actually did happen, and apply it to what's happening today, and just look around and wake up. So many people are waking up to very, very different things, but very good things, and just open your eyes and look around and apply these things to what's happening around you. Kind of piece together what's going on.
Right.
It can be difficult because of the way it's written in Scripture, and applying it to today, because it was written so long ago by many different people. And it may take a little bit for you to put the two, one and one together and figure out, oh, okay, I kind of get this now. Take a little time and sit back and, just go over it again, and maybe replay the video and just go back again. And certain things are happening, and you can kind of see them happening like right in front of your eyes. It's written here in text, which cannot possibly have been written in today's, dialogue. It was written some time ago, and you're watching it play out right in front of you. It's kind of a direction map, or a GPS, if you will.
Right, exactly. It's a roadmap. Yep.
Yeah. And really take heed to it, and look at it and understand it. And you may not agree with it. I don't agree with a lot of things said. I can look and see a lot of similarities, which you cannot ignore. I cannot ignore. And you have to get past it and start to look into things that could be happening. Not that it's going to foretell the future, because that's tomorrow. It's not going to happen yet. In fact, just right now, after I said that, all right, that moment's gone. Well, it's behind us. Well, it's in the past. Now it's the future. Oh, future's gone. It's behind us now. You can do that all day long. To throw a couple jokes in there. And I didn't want to make it a comedy thing or anything, because you know how my sense of humor is. If I get going, I don't want to do that. There's several hangouts that you've done, very informative. Enjoyed all of them. I missed one on Tuesday, and I apologize for that. Glad to join back in today, and for anybody to go back and watch the series on these different things. There's, I think, 5 in total. Is that correct, Paul? Right. Yeah, five in total. Yep. And go back and just check them out, and pause, and maybe look something up for yourself, and maybe go over it again and take a look at it. I would encourage everyone who sees the video to go ahead and do that.
All right. Thanks, Larry. And there's another question: if our sins are forgiven, why are we judged at the white throne? There's, like I said, there's 3 different judgments. One is for the church at the rapture, and that's the Bema seat judgment. We're judged according to our deeds. This is not a judgment for salvation. That's determined by our faith alone. And then there's the second judgment is of the living survivors of the tribulation, to see who gets to keep going, living for the millennium. And the third is the white throne at the end for all the rest of the dead. So, and they will be judged on the basis of whether or not they, their deeds were evil, or their name was written in the book of life. And then we wish we knew more about that, but they didn't tell us. But those whose names are not there are thrown into the lake of fire. And we don't know what happens to those whose names are there, what eternity is like. We're just not told, other than it's going to be great. That's all we know. So yeah, the great white throne is not for us who are part of the church right now. That's right.
Yeah.
When do we get our crowns? I don't know. It doesn't say. It just says that our deeds will be tested, and we will be earn the wages that, we will be given compensation for the things we did. That's how we earn crowns. It says in one passage in the New Testament talks about a crown of righteousness for those who are eager for Jesus to come back. So that's kind of just a reward for expecting him, keeping watch. There's other crowns for other things. Crowns in the sense of accomplishing something that it's just probably the best we can understand, the way the Bible would describe things going on in the supernatural, that we probably, that's the closest we can get to describing, but I'm sure it will be a good thing. If Israel only came into existence recently, why is it mentioned in the Bible? Israel didn't just come into existence recently. There's plenty of archaeological evidence that there's been a Hebrew presence in the area for thousands of years, and that the area they occupy at the present time is only a small portion of the land that they were given by God back in the time of Moses after they left Egypt. And the people they displaced in that area were generally extremely evil and doing child sacrifices. And one of the places we know, there's a valley in Israel where they used it as a perpetual trash heap, and it was always on fire. And it was a place where people used to sacrifice their children in the fire to Molech. And so they were desecrating the god Molech by making a trash heap out of what used to be his shrine. So, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Israel, as a state of Israel, founded in 1948, does not mean the chosen one. Jews are not the chosen one. It's something totally different.
The chosen people, I think I talked about it a long time ago. I'm not sure if it was in this series or not, but God said point blank in the Old Testament that he did not choose them because they were so awesome, but because they were awful, and that it meant that anything they did was his doing, God's doing, rather than theirs. And genetically, they are descendants of Abraham through his son Isaac and through his son Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and that's where Israel started. He was the grandson of Abraham. The word Palestine was actually applied to that area after the Romans defeated and conquered Israel, and they were mocking and insulting Israel by naming it after their enemies, the Philistines, and so they called it Palestina, and that's where the name Palestine came from. That was a derogatory name to insult the Jews for giving the Romans so much trouble. Lots of other stuff I got on my websites about all that, about the history, the Balfour Declaration and all those other things. As I've said before, the prophecies state there's a thing called the dry bones prophecy. If you ever heard that old spiritual song, them dry bones, that's what it comes from. And it's a vision where pretty sure it was Ezekiel again, who was taken to a valley filled with a bunch of dry bones, and they came to life, and eventually God would breathe life into them, but this happened in stages. And so it was telling that eventually Israel would come back again, but in stages. And in order for the prophecy of Daniel to complete, which is what Revelation is all about, the Jews have to be in their land in unbelief, being bad again, because they're going to be punished heavily, severely. So that's why they're exactly what we would expect for this to be fulfilled. They're there in their ancient land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea and the Jordan River, and they're bad.
And the Black Sea.
Huh?
Well, and the Black Sea, of course.
Well, Black Sea is up in Russia. Dead Sea and the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea are kind of the boundary. Israel is pretty narrow, actually, and doesn't have a lot of space. So it's the Dead Sea that I think you're thinking of there. Yeah, the Rothschilds, that was the Balfour Declaration, created it, but the fact is God predicted it. God can make bad people do things for him, and he used Pharaoh in Egypt to do things that he needed done, and he could use the Rothschilds to do things he needed done. The fact is, regardless of the cause, that they are there in unbelief, which is exactly what we would expect. Plus, the fact that Rothschild did it is just going to be more, judgments against him if for some reason this is, I'm totally off base about it. For him to try to do fakery would be just more of sins to add to his pile. So,
I was going to say, I don't think they could do anything else to
yeah.
Point the finger in their direction any more than it's already been pointed.
Right. And there's, I just remembered another Old Testament prophecy that says, ask rhetorically, can a nation be born in a day? No sooner is Zion in labor, but that she gives birth to her children. And that is talking about an instantly formed nation. And that's exactly what the Balfour Declaration did. It's unheard of. And it was prophesied. That's the thing. It's prophesied thousands of years before. Some people will say, well, he was, they're following the script. But the fact is that it was predicted. And when it comes down to it, who you're going to believe, and once again, I say the Bible is a book that no evil person would write, because the Jews wouldn't write it because it paints them in such a bad light. They're stiff-necked, they're rebellious, they're unfaithful. The Christians wouldn't write it, especially the disciples, because it portrays them as cowardly and stupid and thick, and it portrays women as holding a prominent positive role. It just doesn't make any sense. And for people who are liars, like I just read in Revelation about their fate in the lake of fire, that would be the Rothschilds and people like that. Why would they write a book that has them spending eternity in the lake of fire? That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it has been very enlightening and very interesting, and I've enjoyed 4 out of the 5. And I did catch and went back and watched the last one, which I wasn't part of. It has been very enlightening, and who would have thought a crazy guy like Larry hanging out with Paula and just asking questions and doing some different things. You would have never thought that would have happened. Looking into different things which I haven't done before, and I can tell you that if anybody out there wants to go and do a one-on-one or a Q&A or something like that, please post in the comments, and we can always set something up and have it back and forth. I know there's many people out there that consider themselves biblical scholars and different things that have done a lot of the research, as well as Paula has, and I think it would be a very good conversation to have.
And thanks again, Larry, for kind of encouraging me to do this series and being there for giving me the little breaks and things and watching the chat. Hey, no problem. And I wanted to just at the end here, I wanted to quick look up a thing I did about the Balfour Declaration, if I can find that. There's Palestine and Palestinians. Let me grab that link and I'll put that in the chat here. Let me post that.
Perfect. Yeah, I saw the rest of them out there. I think you covered almost all of them so far.
What about Christians and Jews? Maybe that is. I thought I had another one, but no, there it is. That's about the Balfour, and it's interesting if you can see this map. That's the original area granted by the Balfour Declaration. The area Israel actually wound up with is this little strip here between. There's the Dead Sea and the.
Yep.
Right there is Israel, but they were supposed to have all of Saudi Arabia and Jordan.
Yeah, exactly. That wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, well, the British.
That wasn't going to happen.
What do you call that? Double-crossed a lot of people. So, yeah, they got shattered.
No, you're kidding. The British actually would do that?
Oh yeah, they were naughty.
Yeah, exactly. You got the Gaza strip on the bottom there, and Turkey, and oh man, there's just so many problems.
Yep, this was the British Mandate, they called that, and some other links there and things. Here's some interesting quotes. I'll just end with this stuff. Sure. There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. Our country was for centuries part of Syria. Palestine is alien to us. It is the Zionists who introduced it. Quoting a local Arab leader to the British Peel Commission in 1937. 1937. And then the next quote, there is no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not. Professor Philip Heaty, Arab historian to Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry, 1946. It is common knowledge that Palestine is nothing but southern Syria. Ahmed, whatever his name is, United Nations Security Council, 1956. Hamas leader admits there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. So, interesting quotes from the so-called Palestinians who wouldn't even want to be called that today.
Yes,
about Palestine.
from, from so long ago, and yet those terms keep coming up, because if you say Hamas, a lot of people know what that means today.
Right.
Which is something from, you know, you're talking about 60, 65 years ago, a long time ago. And it comes up today, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, oh, wow, wow. Come on, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, there's a lot of details that really make a difference in opinions if people read them. So
Yes.
this site, this What in the World site, is one of mine. The other is just the feather.net, and from there you can get to the other ones. We'll just bring that up real quick here. Post that in the chat, as if that's hard to remember.
Actually, you can actually just put it right on the watch page, so it's always there for anybody to look up, as opposed to just chat.
Yeah, I can put those in the description if I just remember to do it. That's the hard part. Balfour Declaration, I believe, was 1947, and it actually took effect in 48, I think. And of course, that they didn't actually possess, the Jews did not possess Jerusalem until 1967 in the Six-Day War. Some people put a lot of, as far as trying to calculate times and things, which I don't recommend, but they try to, some of them count from 1948, some from 1967. So
great. That was the year I was born. That's terrific. Now you've upset me. Now I got New Jersey with New Jerusalem. They're calling it NJ. Now I got my year of birth. Come on, Paulie. Come on. There's got to be some positive. We gotta end this on a positive note here. Positive note. Think positive.
Well, first, one negative note. I was born in 1958, which is the year of Sputnik.
Oh.
And a lot of other things that happened in 1958. So, so don't feel too bad. But
all right. No, I don't feel much better, but I'm getting there. I'm working on it.
So the positive note would be you too can escape all this stuff. As far as there's, you know, I've talked earlier about the rapture in one of the earlier hangouts, and how it's not going to be easy to fake for any Christian who knows the Bible at all, because the dead in Christ will rise, and that's a big thing Satan cannot do, and would not be able to fake too well at all, because, you know, you can go and see if the people are still in their graves, if their bodies are still there. They're going to be, everybody who was a Christian that ever had lived and died will be gone. The bodies will be gone, and we will be gone. You know, the living are transformed and taken away too. So a bunch of people disappear, and the one thing they have in common is being at least somewhat associated with being a Christian, because some are better at displaying it than others. But then you'll know what just happened, and that's not something we're going to be fooled about, because for another thing, Jesus isn't going to ask us any questions. He already knows who belongs to him. He's just going to take you. And so it won't be possible to be fooled. I mean, it's going to happen when it happens, and when it happens, we will be taken. So
that's right. I'll tell you, the only thing I fear is my mother coming back, and she's been gone a couple of years, and she's going to look at me and be like, what did I tell? Oh boy. I'm going to be like, oh crap.
What? You know, it's never too late.
I know. I like to end on a good note, on a happy note, and there are things that everybody can do in their everyday life. They can change everything almost immediately. Just do yourself and do you, and, you know, get out there and you know, just be happy. Of course, I've been pissed at many people, and after it's over, and that's the end of it. And you know, we'll never know. It's just, it's going to happen, whether you like it or not. It's coming. It's going to happen. Everybody's been fear mongering for so many years about this sort of thing. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen anyway. It's already written. It's been written thousands of years ago. And they're sitting there like, okay, when do we pull the trigger? All right, who's gonna hit the button?
Right. Well, I think that just speculation again here on my part, but that the reason we keep going to the edge and not falling off, and keep going to the edge and not falling off, is because the church is still here. You know, the rapture hasn't happened yet. We are kind of the doorstop that's delaying doom, which some people are really upset about. They want it to happen.
Yeah, I know.
But,
That is, yeah. As you say that, it's kind of disheartening that the church is actually prolonging, because the church is not the church that everybody thinks it is. It's just not.
Yeah, there's the fake church. There's the misguided church.
Right.
We went those letters to the 7 churches. 5 of them had big problems, and and I think, I just gotta let me. If I go back to my book site, where is that? Let me just go there just for a second, and I have. See, which one was I going to look at here? Boy, I just totally lost my train of thought.
There you go.
I don't know.
You're going back to the book site with the, a prophecy or something, or?
Yeah. What was I saying just before that? I totally
I'll
lost
have to rewind it. I don't even.
Totally lost it. Oh, well. Anyway, I got a book site.
Oh, gosh. See what happens when I join in the conversation, Paul. I did this before. I'm like, you can't invite me in because it gets all messed up in the end.
It's okay. You reminded me stuff too, so it goes both ways.
All right.
Anyway, maybe I can play it back later and remember, but oh well. Anyway, whatever I was going to say, whatever I was saying before that, you go to my book site and there's something to do with it there. That's the closest I can get.
All right. Actually, Victoria just, if we disappeared, you know what's up. Okay, yeah. Yeah, if we disappeared, we know what's up. But for some reason, I'm not going to disappear. I myself have my own certain beliefs, and I would want to be here to see the poop show. I'm not going to use any profanity. And I would want to be here for when the crap hits the fan, and I'm glad I'm here right now. I've met a lot of new friends, including Paula herself, and I am enjoying every moment of it.
Awesome, thanks. I think it had something. I was sitting there trying to remember why I did that, but I don't know. Anyway, what I'm doing next, asking the chat, I don't know if this was just kind of actually more of a, one day I said, I think I should talk about Revelation. I'll try that. And kind of done with that. I don't know.
Actually, it started because I had asked you. I had said, okay, Paul, I had some questions about the Bible, and I still do. And Paula was very gracious, and she's like, okay, well, I've translated from Greek to English. And I was like, oh, could you present it? It was in private. It was not live. It's not out there. It was between us and a couple friends. And she went through, and I'm like, we really have to put this out there. And it's going to, get rid of kind of the naysayers, if you will, which kept coming at you. Like, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, yeah, you really do know what you're talking about. You've already done the homework. And that's why I thought it was very important to put these things out. I think there's, I did one myself, which was on my channel. And then you had your series here. And there, I would challenge anybody, if you want to come at it, and be respectful about it, and, have a decent conversation about it and come at it that way. It's great. It's open to everybody, and post in comments or chat or something. And we can do something with a moderator. It may not be me, it may be somebody else, whoever you want to choose, and just have a little back and forth on different things. But what I can tell you is Paula has done her homework and done it quite well, I might add. Much better than I could have ever done and have ever done on any certain topic. So when somebody comes at her and says, well, you don't know the Bible, I'm like, okay, really? Seriously?
Thanks.
Seriously? I'll act like my youngest daughter, like Katie, like, seriously? Come on, seriously? Really? Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad you did the series, and I'm sure there'll be a new series. We'll figure out something, and moving forward and keeping it going with different things and how it kind of interacts with what's going on today, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I think I kind of remember looking at the chat here. Patchen said about maybe next time go through the book. You can see there, You Are All One. That's I think was one of the things I was going to show. The other might have been about free will, because you mentioned about, these things are going to happen whether we like it or not, and that's true. But we do have free will within boundaries, and
Oh yeah.
we're here to mainly choose between good and evil, and between God and Satan, and choose our which kingdom we want to be citizens of, and that's a big, that is a free choice. But the You Are All One book is about the fake church. I think that's what we were talking about, the fake church. The other one that has to do with that is that reddish gray one, The Reformers and Their Stepchildren, is not my book, but one I talk about. And that one also shows you don't know how fake it is. It's faker than that. And so there's a lot, I've spent most of my life as a Christian critiquing the fake church. And that's why I wrote the books that I wrote. That You Are All One is about against hierarchy in the church. So there's so much wrong with all of it. And there's a lot that is good that happens too, though. I mean, nothing's perfect. We're all imperfect humans, and nobody has all the answers. But I think we can do better. And that's why I do the research. And all of us is good at something. It's the prophecy book cover there, you can see, has a puzzle piece, a jigsaw puzzle, and that's what it all is. We each got a section of the puzzle, or a piece here and a piece there, and we look for the corners and edges and try to find our boundaries, and put the picture together. So yeah, maybe I'll do that You Are All One sometime. It's going to attract a different crowd, though. Prophecy is more of a general topic, because everybody talks about what's coming and what's going on right now in the world. Of course. So yeah, that would be probably more specifically Christian interest, but yeah, I'm happy that you got me into this, and for everybody who showed up. So
it's been good. It's been good. The next series is coming out real soon.
Alrighty, I think we're gonna shut this down and let everybody move on and to Larry's Hangout or whatever is going on next. Okay.
I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Flat Earth Mafia has something going on.
All right.
And that would be interesting. That would be good.
Okay. Well, let's shut it down, and thanks everybody for coming.
Okay. Thanks all. Peace.